Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 85 of Journey into Legends. Today we'll be reading Edge of Victory 2, Rebirth by Greg Keyes. Rebirth was released in 2001, and it's the second and final book of the Edge of Victory duology, as well as the 8th book of the New Jedi Order series. I absolutely loved the first book of this duology, so I'm really excited to jump into this next book. Without further ado, let's read and review. Following the events of the previous book, where Tahiri was brutally tortured and shaped by the Vong, Anakin stays on the errant venture to support her throughout her recovery. However, when he and Corran decide to go on a short little harmless supply run to Eriadu, Tahiri stubbornly insists on joining them. And from here, their simple little supply run goes awry real fast. On Eriadu, they find a Jedi being attacked by Peace Brigaders, and though they're too late to save him, he utters the words Yag'Dhul before dying. Escaping the Peace Brigade, they end up hijacking a Yuuzhan Vong scout ship and arrive at Yag'Dhul, where the Vong will later arrive and a battle soon breaks out. Amidst all this, they learn that Noma Nor is on the station disguised as a Given and is responsible for sabotaging the station's defenses. Eventually, the Yuuzhan Vong are forced to withdraw their forces after their ship womb at Sernpidal is attacked. Overall, I really enjoy this plotline for a number of reasons. Firstly, I enjoy the dynamic between Corran, Anakin, and Tahiri, especially the scene with Anakin and Tahiri finally realizing they have feelings for each other and kissing. I also really enjoyed everything with Noma Nor, including his failed schemes, and him refusing to duel Anakin, dishonoring himself in front of a group of warriors, whom he later kills. My only complaint with this plotline is that the Battle of Yag'Dhul itself was kind of an afterthought, and as a result was a bit underwhelming. The other major battle of this book is an assault on the ship womb at Sernpidal, which, from recon gathered by Kip Duron, was building a massive gravity superweapon. Kip and Jaina then bring this information to Rogue Squadron, Wedge, and Admiral Crefay, and they all launch an assault on the weapon and successfully destroy it. However, during the battle, Jaina realizes that Kip lied about the weapon. What they had originally thought was a gravity weapon absorbing energy from the sun was actually a series of Dovin basils leading from the ship womb to the sun that were using the energy of the sun to build the weapon, which was actually a world ship meant for civilians. And once again, Kip is a piece of shit, depending on your point of view. Our third plotline involves Han, Leia, and Jacen as they travel the galaxy helping to build what Luke calls the Great River, a series of routes and outposts to help shelter Jedi from the Vong and the Peace Brigade. They also disrupt Peace Brigade cargo ships running supplies into Yuuzhan Vong territory and act as privateers, which garners the attention of Savong Law, who the Solos just managed to escape from. Overall, this was a pretty boring and forgettable plotline. I enjoyed the family dynamic between Jacen and his parents, especially his conflict with his father. I also enjoyed the scenes on Tatooine with Card and Shada, and I also enjoyed seeing Vergere again, though she, as well as Savong Law, unfortunately got barely any page time and just didn't do much. One of the most underutilized plotlines in this book was Luke and Mara's, which saw them running from the New Republic, as well as dealing with Mara's sickness and pregnancy. The book actually begins with an arrest warrant being placed on Luke's head, which is really interesting to see, but from there, after leaving Coruscant, Luke and Mara basically spend the rest of the book battling with Mara's returning illness and trying to protect their unborn child. And of course, eventually it all leads to a beautiful scene with Luke and Mara welcoming their son Ben into the galaxy. My problem with this plotline is that it just didn't get enough attention. Seeing Luke as a fugitive of the New Republic is such an interesting change, but that was barely explored. And the moment when Luke, Mara, and Ben came together in the Force to fight off the disease for good was great, but it all felt very sudden and almost too convenient because it didn't get any build-up. And finally, Ben is born, and we get a beautiful scene with Luke and Mara, but it's super short and we get nothing else. The book is extremely short, and I think this plotline could have been explored much more to extend the page count. Our final plotline is one that pretty much stands on its own and doesn't connect in any way to the rest of the book, which may make it feel a bit random to some, but I really enjoyed this plotline, and it's one of my favorites from the whole book. This plotline follows Nen Yim on a dying world ship as she struggles to find a way to save it. But since she can't find any Shaper protocols to save the ship, she continues down her and her late Master Majon Quad's path of heresy. In this book, a Master Shaper named Kai Quad is sent to the world ship to oversee Nen Yim's work and allow her access to the higher cortexes, which are basically just areas of knowledge restricted to Master Shapers. Kai Quad was such an interesting character. His constant abuse and berating of Nen Yim and his refusal to help Nen Yim save the world ship made him a really dislikable character. I was almost hoping Nen Yim's plan to murder him would succeed. The end of this plotline was what really solidified it as one of my favorites of this novel, which saw Kai Quad bring Nen Yim to Supreme Overlord Shimra. Kai Quad also reveals himself to be Shimra's jester Onimi. Shimra then allows Nen Yim to continue with her heresy and bypass the Shaper protocols. This was such a fantastic scene and such a great introduction to Shimra and Onimi, and I'm so excited to see more of them. Overall, this book was significantly weaker than the previous book. It felt a lot messier, with a few of the plotlines never really converging, and some of them lacking significance. However, this was still a great book, though not quite one of my favorites of the series so far. Alright, next we have Star Wars Tales issue number 10, which has 5 stories, starting with Trooper, which follows a random stormtrooper as he recalls his life before the Empire, his training, and eventually his current mission, which happens to be the boarding of the Tantive 4, where he's the first to board, and he ends up being the trooper that gets shot by Princess Leia. Overall, this was a fine story. The writing was a bit hard to follow, and I didn't really care for the trooper himself, but it was cool that he was involved in the Tantive 4 battle, even if this is non-canon. Next, we have Skreej, which follows a man named Tamtel Skreej, the guy who Lando is pretending to be in Jabba's palace. This was a pretty decent story, a little too comedic for my taste, and the art wasn't great, but it serves as a fine, albeit non-canon explanation of who Lando is pretending to be. Our next story is Nameless, in which Darth Maul is sent by Sidious to kill a Jedi Master. When Maul is bested, he flees, builds his double-bladed lightsaber, and uses it to kill the Jedi Master. This was a decent story, nothing too special, but it's cool to get another Darth Maul story and see how and why he built his lightsaber. Next, we've got a Wookiee Scorned, where Chewie starts to get jealous after Han is spending all his time with Leia. This was not a very good story. I don't mind the overall premise, but the execution was just not good. First of all, the art style is really not for me. Han looks like a 12-year-old here. And secondly, there's a moment where Luke tells Chewie that he wishes Leia weren't his sister, and that's just problematic, to say the least. Anyways, our final story is Free Memory, in which R2 is set to be serviced, but when the rebels can't find him, 3PO goes looking for him and finds him replaying old recordings, including Leia's from A New Hope, one Han recorded before the Battle of Yavin apologizing for leaving, one Leia made for Luke on Hoth, and one of Luke on Endor after the fall of the Empire. After this, 3PO decides that R2 doesn't need to be serviced after all. This was a pretty decent story. I liked seeing all of the different recordings. However, I think this story would have hit a lot harder if it had maybe taken place way in the future, preferably after all the main characters had died, and this was 3PO and R2 reminiscing on memories of their old friends. Of course, Legends didn't explore that far into the future until much later, and they didn't know at the time what would happen to the droids or the other characters in later books. But still, I think this story would have been much sadder that way. Overall, this was a really mediocre issue of Tales, with a few good stories and a few not-so-good ones. Par for the course for Tales. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for my next video where we'll be reading the 6-part novella, Emissary of the Void. See ya.